August 16, 1945. Dawn breaks over a cave in southern Okinawa. Inside the darkness, three pregnant Japanese women kneel with grenades in their trembling hands. They've been taught that American soldiers are monsters who torture women before killing them slowly. Outside, voices call in broken Japanese, "Help! Doctor! Safe!" The women don't believe it. They can't believe it. But then one of them collapses, bleeding out, and a young Navy medic does something unthinkable. He slides his rifle away from himself and steps forward with empty hands raised. No weapon, just a medical bag. The women have a choice: die proving Americans are evil, or trust the enemy and maybe live. One woman emerges from the cave, hands up, belly swollen with new life. What happens next will shatter everything she thought she knew about mercy. Before we begin, if you want to hear more incredible untold stories from history, hit that subscribe button. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. Dawn came to Okinawa on August 16, 1945, not with light but with the smell of sulfur and wet limestone seeping through cracks in the cave walls. Yuki Tanaka knelt in darkness so complete she could not see her own hands, though she felt them trembling around the cold metal cylinder pressed against her swollen belly. The grenade was smooth and heavy, heavier than she expected something designed to end everything to be. Around her in the blackness, she heard the ragged breathing of two other women. Hana's breath came in shallow gasps somewhere to her left. Michiko's was steadier, more controlled, the breathing of someone who had made peace with what came next. They had been in the cave system for 3 days, hiding from the Americans who now controlled the island, surviving on rainwater that dripped through limestone and the last of the rice balls that had gone moldy 2 days ago. The pain had started an hour before dawn. At first, Yuki thought it was hunger, the gnawing emptiness that had become normal. But then it came again, a tightening across her abdomen that made her gasp. And she knew. 7 months. The baby was coming too early, in a cave that smelled of death, with no light and no hope, and a grenade that promised the only honorable escape. She had listened to the orders from the Imperial Army officer 3 weeks ago, his voice calm as he explained what capture by Americans meant. They would defile you. They would torture you. They would do things that death was merciful compared to. He had given them the grenades himself, placing them in their palms like gifts. One for each woman. Pull the pin when they come. Die with honor. Die Japanese. Outside the cave, voices echoed. American voices, harsh and foreign, calling out words Yuki could not understand. She pressed herself against the limestone wall, feeling its dampness soak through her threadbare dress. The propaganda posters flashed in her mind, the ones plastered on every wall in Naha before the invasion. Americans drawn as demons with fangs, their hands dripping blood, their eyes wild with cruelty. The radio broadcasts had been worse, describing in detail what happened to women who fell into enemy hands. She had believed it all because why would her own government lie? Why would the emperor's voice, transmitted through crackling speakers, tell anything but truth? Another contraction seized her and she bit down on her sleeve to keep from crying out. The pain was different from anything she had felt before, not sharp but vast, rolling through her body like a wave that pulled her under. She thought of Hiroshi, her husband, dead at Iwo Jima 5 months ago. She thought of his last letter, the one where he told her to be strong, to raise their son in a victorious Japan, to teach him honor above all else. She wondered what honor meant now, in a cave with a grenade, with a baby coming too soon. The voices outside grew closer. Then came words in broken Japanese, mangled by an American accent but unmistakable. Help! Doctor! Safe! Yuki's heart hammered against her ribs. Lies. It had to be lies. They were trying to trick the women into emerging, into surrendering so they could do worse things than quick death in the darkness. She gripped the grenade tighter. Hana whimpered somewhere in the blackness. Michiko said nothing. Then a different sound, something sliding across stone. Yuki's eyes, adjusted to the dark, caught the faint outline of something pushed through the cave opening. A bag, medical bag, Her nurse's training recognized automatically. Then another shape, longer, angular, a rifle, but moving away from the entrance, not pointing toward them. Away. A man's voice called out again, and this time Yuki heard the exhaustion in it, the pleading note that propaganda had never mentioned. No gun. Only help. She could see his silhouette now against the gray dawn light filtering through the entrance. His hands were raised. Empty. No weapon. Just a man standing there with his palms up like surrender, except he was the one who held all the power. Hana's breathing changed. Yuki knew that sound from her nursing training during the war. She crawled toward it through the darkness, her pregnant belly scraping stone, and found Hana lying on her side. Warm wetness soaked the cave floor. Blood. Too much blood. In the faint light from the entrance, Yuki saw Hana's face, gray and slick with sweat. Full term. The baby was coming now. The hemorrhaging meant complications, meant death if nothing was done. In a hospital with lights and instruments and doctors, maybe Hana would live. In a cave with a grenade and darkness, she would not. Yuki's hands moved automatically, checking pulse, feeling the hardness of contractions through Hana's dress. Her medical training fought against her fear. Hana was 19 years old. Hana had survived 2 years of horror Yuki could barely comprehend. Hana deserved to live. The baby deserved to. Live. But trusting Americans meant betraying everything Yuki had been taught, everything Hiroshi died believing. It meant choosing enemy mercy over Japanese honor. It meant admitting that maybe, possibly, the Emperor's voice had lied. Another contraction hit Yuki and she gasped. Her own baby, pressing down. 2 babies coming in a cave. 2 mothers bleeding. One choice that would decide everything. She looked at the grenade in her hand. She looked at Hana's gray face. She looked at the silhouette in the entrance, hands still raised, still waiting. Yuki pushed herself to standing, legs shaking, and moved toward the light. Her hands went up, mirroring his. The grenade stayed on the cave floor behind her. She stepped into dawn and saw his face for the first time, young, tired, scared, human. Not a demon, just a man who looked as terrified as she felt. She searched her memory for English words from school, from before the war, from when languages were bridges instead of walls. Her voice came out broken and small. Please, baby coming. He saw her pregnant belly and something changed in his face. Relief, determination. He moved toward her slowly, hands still visible, and said words she would remember forever. I got you. 2 words that should have been a threat but sounded like a promise. 2 words that meant maybe, impossibly, she had made the right choice. 2 words that meant her son might live to see morning. Jake Morrison had cleared 11 caves that morning and found only bodies. Men who had chosen grenades over surrender. Civilians who believed the propaganda more than their own will to live. He was tired in a way that went deeper than muscles. Tired in his soul. And when he heard the crying from cave number 12, he almost convinced himself it was wind through limestone. But wind did not sound like labor. Wind did not make the specific, unmistakable sound of a woman bringing new life into a world that had spent 4 years perfecting death. He called out in the broken Japanese that Private Yamada had taught him, mangling the pronunciation but hoping the intent carried through. When silence answered, he made a choice that could get him court-martialed. He slid his medical bag through the opening first, then his rifle, pushing it away from himself across the stone. His hands went up and he felt more exposed than he had ever felt under enemy fire. Empty hands in a war zone. His drill instructor would have beaten him for it. But Jake had grown up on an Iowa farm where you approached scared animals slowly, with open palms, letting them see you meant no harm. Women in labor were not that different from heifers struggling to deliver. The fear was the same. The need was the same. When she emerged from the darkness, Jake saw her pregnant belly first, then her face. Younger than his sister back home. Eyes wild with terror but also something else. Determination. Choice. She had chosen to trust him, and he could see what that choice cost her. Her hands were up but shaking. Her dress was soaked with cave dampness and something darker. blood, but not hers. Someone else was in there. Someone else was dying. Jake kept his voice steady. "I got you." 2 words his mother used when he was small and scared. 2 words that meant safety when the world felt dangerous. The woman's eyes locked on his, and he saw the exact moment she decided to believe him. Not trust, not yet, but belief that maybe death was not the only option left. He radioed for Lieutenant Chin and the field ambulance, speaking fast, explaining 3 pregnant POWs, 1 critical, 1 in early labor, 1 stable for now. The voice on the other end wanted to argue protocol, but Jake cut him off. He had already broken protocol by disarming himself. Might as well break the rest of it too. Within 20 minutes, Sarah Chin arrived with 2 corpsmen and a determination that matched his own. She took one look at the situation and made the call that would define everything that followed. They were patients first. Camp later. Babies came before bureaucracy. They set up the medic tent 50 yards from the cave entrance, close enough that the women could see it from the darkness, far enough that it felt like neutral ground instead of a trap. Jake went back to the cave opening and called out again. Hana's name, which the first woman had whispered. Michiko's name. Yuki's name. Names, not numbers. People, not enemies. Slowly, with Jake's help, they brought Hana out on a stretcher. She was unconscious, gray-faced, hemorrhaging badly, full term and dying. The delivery took 6 hours. Sarah worked with steady hands while Jake monitored vitals, and Yuki, despite her own contraction starting, translated medical terms in a mixture of Japanese and English that revealed training Jake had not expected. She was a nurse. Had been a nurse. Whatever the war had made her into underneath, she still remembered how to count pulse rates and recognize the signs of placental abruption. She translated his questions to Hana during the brief moments Hana surfaced into consciousness. She held Hana's hand through the worst of it. She did not ask for anything for herself, even when her own contractions made her gasp. The baby came at dusk, a girl with lungs that announced her arrival to the entire camp. Hana was weak, barely conscious, but alive. Sarah stitched and monitored and finally sat back with blood on her hands and satisfaction in her eyes. They had done it. Against orders, against protocol, against every reason the war gave them not to care. They had saved 2 lives. That night, after Hana was stabilized and sleeping with her daughter tucked against her chest, Sarah explained something to Yuki that made the young woman's eyes go wide. The Geneva Convention. POW rights, medical care, food, wages for work, letters home, names recorded, not numbers, treatment as human beings, not animals. Yuki listened with the intensity of someone hearing a foreign language that changed everything. You keep rules, even for enemies? Her voice was barely a whisper. Jake answered before Sarah could. Especially for enemies. That's what makes us different. He meant it. He had watched too many good men die in this war. He had held Tommy's dog tags since Guadalcanal and wondered if healing Japanese prisoners dishonored his brother's sacrifice. But sitting there in a medic tent with a newborn baby crying and a mother who had chosen trust over death, Jake knew Tommy would have understood. The only way to win a war was to remember what you were fighting for. And you could not fight for humanity if you forgot what humanity meant. The complication arrived the next morning in the form of Captain Hendricks, Intelligence Corps, with orders and anger in equal measure. These women had information. Cave networks, holdout positions, civilian locations. He gave Sarah and Jake 48 hours to stabilize the patients before interrogation and transport. Not a request. An order. Sarah argued medical necessity. Jake backed her. Hendricks was unmoved. 48 hours. Then they were intelligence assets, not patients. That night, Jake brought Yuki a small package, powdered milk in a tin, a blanket with yellow flowers that one of the nurses had donated. He set it beside her cot and said simply, "For after." Not if, after. As if her baby surviving was a certainty, not a hope. As if the future existed beyond the next 48 hours. Yuki's hands shook as she touched the blanket. No one had given her anything gentle since Hiroshi died. Everything had been orders or rations or tools of war. This was soft. This was kind. This assumed she would need it because she would live long enough to use it. Her labor started at midnight and lasted until dawn. Sarah and Jake delivered her son as the sun rose over Okinawa, painting the destroyed island gold. The baby was small but healthy, screaming his arrival with strength that made everyone in the tent smile despite exhaustion. Yuki wept as she held him, whispering a name. Hiroshi, after his father, after the man who died believing in a victory that never came. Jake helped her sit up, checked her vitals with practiced efficiency, and grinned the farm boy grin that made him look younger than 28. He's got good lungs, stubborn like his mama. For one perfect morning there was no war, just new mothers and tired medics and babies who did not know about enemies yet. Just humans being human in the ruins of inhumanity. Just mercy, small and fragile and real. Sarah Chen sat with 3 women who had every reason not to trust her and helped them write letters home. It was the kind of task that seemed small until you understood what it meant. Yuki writing to her mother-in-law, explaining that Hiroshi's son had been born healthy but early, that she was alive when she should be dead, that Americans had saved her instead of destroying her. Hana writing to a sister she had not seen in 3 years, not knowing if the sister had survived the war or even if mail could reach Korea anymore. Michiko staring at blank paper for a long time before writing a single line to a husband imprisoned for speaking truth, hoping he was still alive to read it. The letters took hours because words mattered and every sentence had to be translated, checked, translated again. Sarah's Japanese was functional but not perfect, and she wanted to get this right. These were not interrogation transcripts or medical reports. These were proof that the women existed, that they had names and families and futures that extended beyond prisoner of war. Sarah recorded each woman's full name in the official log. Not numbers. Not enemy combatants. Yuki Tanaka, age 23, former Imperial Army nurse. Hana Park, age 19, Korean civilian. Michiko Takahashi, age 26, school teacher. Women with histories that mattered. Slowly, carefully, the 3 women began to open up. Not about military intelligence or troop movements, about themselves. Yuki showed them the pressed flower from Hiroshi's last letter, a forget-me-not that had somehow survived the journey from Iwo Jima to Okinawa to a cave to a medic tent. She explained that her husband had written poetry in the margins of his letters, describing the color of volcanic sand and the taste of captured American chocolate he saved to remember rather than eat. She cried when she admitted that Hiroshi died believing Japan would win, believing their son would grow up in an empire that no longer existed. Sarah listened and did not try to fix it. Some grief had no solution. You just witnessed it. Hana spoke in whispers about a village in Korea, about being 17 and told she would work in a factory, about 2 years that had stolen everything except the stubborn core of self she protected by remembering her sister's face. She admitted she had believed dying in childbirth would finally end it. That American mercy confused her more than American cruelty would have, that she did not know how to be human again after being treated as property for so long. Sarah held her hand while she spoke and did not look away. Bearing witness was the least she could do, the very least. Michiko was quiet for the longest time. When she finally spoke, her formal English was nearly perfect, learned from missionary teachers before the war. She had been a school teacher in a small village outside Naha. Her husband had distributed pamphlets questioning the war, gentle pamphlets that quoted poetry and asked questions instead of declaring answers. The military police had arrested him from their schoolhouse while students watched. Michiko had fled 5 months pregnant, choosing survival over resistance and hating herself for it. She taught the other women a lullaby from her childhood, a song about cranes returning home. They hummed it together while their babies slept. Jake learned about the interrogators from another corpsman. Intelligence officers were coming from division headquarters. They wanted information about cave networks, holdout positions, civilian locations still harboring Japanese soldiers who refused to surrender. The women were now classified as intelligence sources. If they cooperated, they might stay with their babies. If they did not cooperate, they would be separated and detained indefinitely as non-cooperative enemy combatants. The babies would go to civilian internment. The mothers would go somewhere else. Jake found Sarah in the medical tent checking Hannah's post-delivery vitals. "We can't let them take the kids." His voice was low but urgent. Sarah looked at him with the expression of someone who had already done the math and knew the cost. She drafted a medical report that night, classifying all 3 women as immediate postpartum, critical care required, not suitable for interrogation or transport for a minimum of 2 weeks. It was a lie built on enough truth to be defensible. Hana was still weak from blood loss. Yuki had delivered early. Michiko was 5 months pregnant and showing signs of stress-induced complications. Sarah signed the report. Jake signed it too. They both knew it might end their careers. They signed it anyway. The collapse came 3 days later. A Marine officer arrived with Private Yamada translating and photographs spread across a field table. One showed Yuki in her Imperial Army nurse uniform, young and proud, before the war stole that from her. Another showed the cave complex from above, marked with tactical notations. The officer was polite but firm. How many soldiers in the caves? Where were the holdouts? Were there booby traps, explosives, ambush positions? He needed answers. American lives depended on those answers. Yuki sat with baby Hiroshi in her arms and felt the world narrow to a single impossible choice. She knew the answers. She had treated soldiers in those caves, had memorized the tunnel layouts, had heard officers planning last stands and final defenses. She could tell the Americans everything. She could save American lives. But telling meant betraying Japanese soldiers who were still hiding, still believing surrender meant torture and death. Young men, teenagers some of them, who trusted the same propaganda she had trusted. If she spoke, she would be responsible for what happened to them. The officer gave her an hour. When she still had not answered, he delivered the consequence with bureaucratic efficiency. Non-cooperative enemy combatants, babies to civilian internment, mothers to detention, separate facilities, immediate transport. He was not cruel about it, just clear. These were the rules. She could change the outcome by cooperating. The choice was hers. Yuki looked at Hiroshi sleeping against her chest. She looked at Hana, who had survived 2 years of systematic brutality and now held a daughter who needed her. She looked at Michiko, pregnant and alone, waiting for a husband who might already be dead. Then she looked at Jake and Sarah, who had risked everything to show her that mercy existed, who had kept their promises when her own government had lied, who had treated her like a human being when they could have treated her like an enemy. She told them everything, every cave location, every officer's name, every supply cache and tunnel system and holdout position she knew. Her voice was steady while she spoke and broke only at the end. The officer thanked her. The information would save American lives. He promised the women could stay with their babies. He kept that promise. That night, Yuki learned from a guard that Marines had raided the caves at dawn. 19 Japanese soldiers found. 16 surrendered. 3 fought and were killed. Teenage boys, the guard said. Kids, really. 16 going home to their families. 3 dead because they believed surrender meant something worse than death. Yuki stopped eating, stopped holding Hiroshi, stopped speaking. She had saved 16 lives by ending 3. She had betrayed her people to protect her son. She had chosen enemy mercy over Japanese honor, and now she would live with that choice forever. I killed them. The words were whispered to no one. I betrayed my people for my baby. Sarah and Jake watched her break and could not fix it. Some wounds went too deep for stitches. Jake sat with Yuki in silence for 2 days. He did not try to fix what was broken because some things could not be fixed with words or medicine or good intentions. He just sat. When she stared at the tent wall, he stared with her. When she refused food, he set it beside her anyway and did not force it. When she would not hold Hiroshi, he held the baby himself and did not judge her for it. Hana fed Hiroshi along with her own daughter, nursing both babies while watching Yuki with worried eyes. Michiko sat close and hummed the lullaby, filling the silence with something softer than guilt. On the third day, Jake finally spoke. You saved 16 kids, 16 boys who get to go home now, and 3 of them are yours. Hiroshi, Hana's daughter, Michiko's baby who's coming any day. His voice was quiet, factual, the same tone he used when explaining medical procedures. Not trying to convince, just stating what was true. Yuki's response came hours later, barely a whisper. But those 3 who died, the ones who fought, the ones who believed surrender meant torture. Jake looked at her with his farm boy face that had seen too much death and still chose to believe in life. Those 3 believed the same lie you did. That surrender meant torture. You didn't kill them. The lie did. And you just made sure 16 other kids won't believe it anymore. 16 boys who are being processed right now, getting medical care and food and POW registration. 16 boys who will write letters home telling their families they are alive. You gave them that. The words did not heal Yuki. Healing would take years, maybe a lifetime, but they cracked something open, let in enough light that she could breathe again. That night she held Hiroshi while he slept. She did not cry. She just held him and felt the weight of what she had chosen. Her son alive. 16 strangers alive. 3 dead because propaganda was more powerful than truth. She would carry all of it, the saving and the cost. News came on the 4th day. Japan had surrendered. The war was officially over. Emperor Hirohito's voice had broadcast across the nation, telling his people to endure the unendurable and bear the unbearable. Surrender was no longer treason. It was imperial command. The propaganda that had sent millions to die had reversed itself in a single radio transmission. Yuki listened to Private Yamada translate the announcement and felt something twist in her chest. If the emperor had surrendered 4 days earlier, those 3 boys would still be alive. If he had surrendered 4 months earlier, Hiroshi might still be alive. The arbitrary timing of it, the casual way history pivoted on decisions made by men who would never see the consequences, made her angry in a way that felt cleaner than guilt. The announcement changed everything and nothing. Internment camps were being closed. Repatriation was beginning. But Japan was rubble and ash, cities destroyed, families scattered, infrastructure gone. Many POWs had nowhere to return to. Okinawa itself was a wasteland. Yuki's home in Naha no longer existed. The hospital where she had trained was a crater. Her mother-in-law's last known address was in a neighborhood that American firebombing had erased. Going home meant going to a place that was not there anymore. Sarah worked with Red Cross officials to arrange something better than detention. A civilian resettlement center on the island, temporary housing with medical care and food distribution, and family reunification services. The women could stay together. The babies could stay with them. It was not freedom exactly, but it was not imprisonment either. It was the space between, where people rebuilt themselves piece by piece. The crisis came unexpectedly. Michiko went into labor at midnight 5 weeks early, and the baby was breech. Sarah and Jake worked through the night, trying to turn the baby, monitoring heart rate, making calculations about when intervention became necessary and manual delivery became the only option. Michiko was quiet through most of it, her schoolteacher composure holding even when pain made her gasp. But when the baby would not turn and Sarah explained they needed to deliver breech, Michiko's control finally broke. She was terrified. She did not want to die before knowing if her husband had survived. Yuki stood up. She had been sitting in the corner, holding Hiroshi, watching. Now she moved to Michiko's side with the purposeful efficiency of someone who had made a choice. She handed Hiroshi to Hana and took Michiko's hand. Sarah looked at her with question and relief. Yuki's nurse training was showing through the trauma, her instincts stronger than her grief. She translated Sarah's instructions, explained what was happening, counted contractions in Japanese while Sarah worked. When Michiko needed to push, Yuki breathed with her, demonstrating the rhythm. When Michiko said she could not do it, Yuki told her she could. Ganbata, Keep going. You are stronger than you know. The baby came at dawn, a boy, small but breathing, crying with the outraged confusion of someone who arrived before he was ready. Jake cleared his airway and wrapped him in warm blankets while Sarah delivered the placenta and checked for hemorrhaging. Michiko wept with relief and exhaustion. Yuki was the first to hold the baby after his mother, cradling him with the tenderness of someone remembering how to be gentle. She whispered the word again. Ganbata. Keep going. For the baby. For Michiko. For herself. Something shifted in Yuki that night. Not healing, but purpose. She had spent 3 days drowning in what she had done. Now she was choosing what she would do next. She would help these women. She would translate for medics. She would hold babies when mothers needed rest. She would keep going because stopping meant letting the propaganda win. Hiroshi had died believing lies. She would live teaching their son truth. Jake and Sarah secured the Red Cross sponsorship by the end of the week. 3 women, 3 babies, transport to the Civilian Resettlement Center with continued medical care and family reunification support. Not detention, not deportation, just space to heal and rebuild. Sarah filed the paperwork with the same meticulous care she used for surgical notes. Every detail mattered. Every signature was protection. This was how you fought propaganda, not with weapons, but with documentation that proved mercy was policy, not accident. On their last morning at the medic tent, Yuki gave Jake something she had carried since Iwo Jima, the pressed forget-me-not from Hiroshi's final letter. She held it out with steady hands and spoke in careful English. Forget-me-not. You showed me something I forgot. My husband would want me to live, to let Hiroshi know his father believed in mercy, even if the war tried to teach him hate. Jake took the flower with the reverence it deserved. He gave her something in return, a piece of paper with an address written in careful block letters. Morrison Farm, Cedar Rapids, Iowa. If you ever make it to America, you've got a place. My family, we've got room. It was an impossible offer in a world still sorting enemies from allies. But impossible things had been happening all week. Why stop now? Sarah Chin visited the Civilian Resettlement Center 3 weeks after the women had been transferred. She told herself it was a routine medical follow-up, ensuring postpartum recovery was proceeding without complications. But the truth was simpler and more human. She needed to see if mercy had taken root or withered. She needed to know if the choices they had made, the rules they had bent, the careers they had risked, had mattered beyond those few desperate days in a medic tent. The center occupied what had been a school before the invasion turned Okinawa into a battlefield. American engineers had repaired the roof and walls, installed field kitchens and temporary sanitation, created something functional from ruins. It housed 200 Japanese and Okinawan civilians, mostly women and children and elderly men, all displaced by a war that had destroyed their homes and scattered their families. Red Cross workers coordinated food distribution and family reunification efforts. Medical personnel treated injuries and illness. Chaplains helped people write letters to relatives they hoped were still alive. It was organized chaos, the mess of rebuilding compressed into too little space with too few resources, but it was working. People were healing, slowly, incompletely, but healing. Sarah found the 3 women in a corner of the main hall that had become their shared space. Yuki sat with Hiroshi on her lap, watching Hana feed both babies while Michiko folded donated cloth into diapers. They looked different than they had in the medic tent. Still thin, still marked by trauma, but no longer braced for death. Their shoulders were not hunched. Their eyes were not empty. They were talking to each other, planning something Sarah could not hear from the doorway. When Yuki looked up and saw Sarah, her face transformed. Not quite a smile, but close. Recognition and gratitude and something more complex. She stood and bowed, formal and deep, then caught herself and extended her hand instead. American gesture. Bridge between cultures. Sarah shook it and felt the strength in Yuki's grip. This woman had survived propaganda and labor and betrayal and guilt. She would survive whatever came next. Hana showed Sarah her daughter, who had gained weight and developed the healthy alertness of a baby who was fed and held and safe. Hana spoke in whispers still, flinching slightly at loud noises, but she spoke. She told Sarah in broken English that her sister had been found, alive, working in a factory in Busan. Red Cross had located her through family reunification records. Letters had been exchanged. Her sister was trying to arrange passage to Okinawa. Hana might see her within months. The hope in her voice was fragile but real. Michiko's son was small but thriving, making up for his early arrival with fierce determination to grow. Michiko herself looked stronger, her formal composure now covering resilience instead of fear. She told Sarah that she had received word through Red Cross channels. Her husband had survived imprisonment. He was in an American detention facility in Kyushu awaiting repatriation processing. They were working on reunification. It would take time. Bureaucracy moved slowly, but he was alive. She would see him again. She would introduce him to their son. The future existed. Yuki pulled Sarah aside to share her own news. A letter had arrived from her mother-in-law. The older woman had survived the firebombing of Tokyo, had been living with relatives in a rural village, had been searching for Yuki since the invasion of Okinawa. The Red Cross had connected them through the POW registration records that Sarah had so carefully documented. Yuki's mother-in-law wanted her to come home, wanted to meet her grandson, wanted to rebuild their family from the ashes. Come home, bring my grandson. The letter was stained and wrinkled from its long journey, but the words were clear. Yuki had somewhere to go. She was not lost anymore, but that was not all Yuki wanted to tell Sarah. She explained carefully, choosing English words with the precision of someone learning to speak truth in a language that used to be the enemy's, that something else was happening at the center. The three women had started helping, translating for American medical staff who needed to communicate with Japanese patients, holding babies when overwhelmed mothers needed rest, teaching other women the lullaby Michiko had shared, the one about cranes returning home. They had created a small support group, informal but growing, where displaced mothers could talk about fear and loss and hope without judgment. Sarah listened and understood what she was witnessing, mercy multiplying. The dignity they had been shown was being passed forward, woman to woman, mother to mother, human to human. This was how propaganda died, not through speeches or policies, but through small acts of compassion that proved the lies wrong. One baby delivered safely, one letter written home, one lullaby shared, one mother telling another mother that surviving was not betrayal, it was resistance. The most powerful resistance of all. Sarah asked if they needed anything. Medical supplies she could requisition, food, clothing, documentation help. Yuki smiled, a real smile this time, and said they needed what they already had. Safety, time, each other. But then she added something that made Sarah's throat tight. We want to help more. Teach us to be better translators. Show us American medical terms. Let us help other women understand that surrender does not mean death. We can do what you did for us. We can be the bridge. Sarah spent the afternoon training them. Medical terminology in English and Japanese. How to explain procedures without frightening patients. How to translate not just words but intent, making sure compassion carried across language barriers. Yuki absorbed everything with the focus of someone who had found purpose. Hana took careful notes, her whispered voice growing stronger as she practiced phrases. Michiko asked questions that revealed the teacher she had been, understanding that education was about more than information, it was about building trust. By evening, the three women were helping in the center's medical clinic, translating for American doctors and nurses, explaining treatments to frightened patients, holding hands and counting breaths, and making sure no one faced fear alone. Sarah watched Yuki kneel beside an elderly woman who was terrified of American medics, watched her explain in gentle Japanese that these people had medicine that would help, that she had been afraid too, but they had saved her life and her baby's life. That trust was hard but possible. The elderly woman looked at baby Hiroshi sleeping peacefully in Yuki's arms and slowly nodded. If the baby trusted these Americans, maybe she could too. That night, Sarah wrote in her journal, the small notebook she had kept through the entire war, documenting what regulations and official reports could not capture. She wrote about 3 women who had emerged from a cave expecting death and found life instead. About mercy offered and mercy received and mercy multiplied. About the way small humane acts could dismantle empires of cruelty one person at a time. About Jake's steady hands and Maggie O'Brien's bureaucratic warfare and Private Yamada's careful translations and all the invisible labor that went into choosing compassion when hate was easier. She wrote one line that summarized everything. The war taught them to hate us. We taught them they were wrong, but they taught us something bigger. That mercy is not weakness. It is the only weapon that wins after the shooting stops. Sarah visited the center once more before shipping out. She found Yuki holding Hiroshi up to sunlight streaming through a repaired window, singing the lullaby about cranes returning home. The baby reached for the light with small, perfect fingers. Yuki's voice was soft but sure. She saw Sarah watching and said in careful English, "Thank you for seeing us. Not seeing us as enemies, not seeing us as prisoners, seeing us as people who needed help. Thank you for that." Sarah smiled and answered with the only truth that mattered, "Thank you for letting us."